Hey everybody, welcome back to Sounds Like a Drum, Cadence Independent Media Production. Today, we're talking again about snare side heads with specific respect to overtones, ringy snares. What can we do with this head to help kind of control everything? This is for the folks out there who tend to reach for the gaff tape, the moon gels, things like that, to help quell overtones, control the snare sound, especially in recording situations, but really any old time, and about how much can be done before you get rid of all those beautiful overtones to just dial everything in and make the drum really easy to play and give you a little bit more dynamic options in it before you start to put a lot of stuff on the head. Thanks so much to Skillshare for sponsoring this episode. If you're unfamiliar with Skillshare, it's an online learning community comprised of thousands of members, thousands of classes that run the gamut, pretty much everything you could think of. There is so much variety over there, from photography to cooking to UX design and music production. I mean, I am amazed at the variety that they offer. The beauty of Skillshare is that all the content on there is real world stuff. It's things you'll actually use to improve productivity, your own quality of life, or if you're like me and you also just want to learn to be better at barbecuing. Yes, they do have classes in cooking. It's not just photography and tech and UX design and things like that. And the first 1,000 people to follow the link below are going to get a free trial membership of Skillshare Premium. This is going to give you access to everything that they have on there. You can look at absolutely everything right out of the gate, figure out what's right for you, what sorts of things you're excited about, and dive right in. Immediately, when I went to Skillshare, I saw a ton of things that I was excited to check out. For instance, there's a beautiful class with Amelia Setzger that teaches you how to do really high-quality conceptual stuff with your iPhone, which, we've all got these things. It's an amazing tool to have, but I don't know everything it can do. So go ahead and follow the link below, join up to get your free trial premium membership, check out all the classes, gives you access to everything. And then when you choose to stay on, it's less than $10 a month to remain a member and get access to all of this incredible information. It goes without saying that any sound that makes you happy is a good sound, and if you like a muffled sound, that's fine. But if you're in situations, and you find yourself in these situations a lot, where you're muffling when you'd rather not, or you're wishing for the good kind of ringy and you can't figure out how to get it, this is kind of the situation that we're in here. I've purposefully chosen my Ludwig chrome over brass sort of superphonic style snare here because it generally sounds good in a variety of tunings. It's relatively tricky to make it sound terrible. It also really exhibits overtones in a specific kind of way where there's like an awesome range between the two heads, and then when you start to get to extremes, it starts to show you things that maybe you don't necessarily want to hear, where if it was me in a pinch and I was working fast, I would just muffle it. First up, let's hear how this drum is sitting right now. Totally usable sound. If I were to just walk up to this drum, I would think that it sounded a little dark for a metal drum, that it sounds pretty boomy. It's activating the floor tom a lot. The articulation at low volumes is kind of broad, a little woofy. And the strike zone that I need to be in to keep from having overtones overwhelm the drum is pretty small. I really have to hit it right in the center, or we end up with a lot of overtones. This is symptomatic of a snare side head being tuned pretty low. In addition to these characteristics, I can also hear that the drum sounds a little bit out of tune. Now, when we sat down and tuned the drum up, I know that the batter head is in tune with itself. I did it. It's a brand new head. So if we're hearing wobbling anywhere, it has to be coming from the snare side head. And there's a lot to that. We're going to address this a little more as we go on, but we do have to think in terms of the snare side head actually giving us what sounds like wild out of tune overtones on the batter side. Now, having the snare side head down in this range is really giving us a lot of kind of silly, weird stuff going on away from the center, which is what I was saying earlier about the strike zone and having to really be right in dead center. There's some dissonance, there's some boominess, there's some wild stuff going on in the wires. Let's check that out real quick. Now, me, even just a few years ago, before I really started to dig into this, I would have assumed there was something wrong with the wires, actually, because the sound I'm hearing that's bothering me is in the wires, primarily. The wires are fine. They're also brand new. So anything we're hearing now that is odd, it is purely just the snare side head. Now, also a younger version of myself or a little bit less experienced with tuning would have maybe heard this and thought, well, it's also not cracking really great, and it sounds really big. I want to tighten it up. Let's tune the snare side up. Let's tune it up really, really, really high. Because in my mind, in my mind's eye, I'm imagining, or my mind's ear, I'm imagining that that's going to give me a cutting, clean, articulate snare sound across the board. So up we go. Now we have overtone issues of a different sort, which is, again, unless I hit the drum right in the center, they're going very crazy. They're also super loud now in terms of like the mix of the drum by itself. And we do kind of want to plant our flag on this and say, this is something that professional drummers and professional tuners are telling people to do as a baseline starting point. Tune the snare side super duper high, adjust your sound with the batter, and if it's too much for you, put muffling on the drum. This is nonsense. This is just one option, and if you like how it sounds, great. But to do an extreme as a starting point makes no sense, no matter what you're talking about. Middle ground is the place to start, and then deviate from there. And before you start to wonder, this is not symptomatic of the snare wires being loose or being incorrectly tensioned for this tuning. I adjusted them. I went out of my way to make sure that at all these tunings, the pressure of the wires and the sensitivity is the same. This is purely that we left the batter alone because we like that range and we cranked up the snare side. That's it. Now, we should also listen to kind of the halfway point here because, again, like I was saying, if you hit it right in the center, it's acceptable and might even be great for some situations. But if you're playing and if you're, enjoying yourself, the chances that you're going to be hitting the center inch of the batter head are not that high. Not to mention the fact that you may not always want that center sound even over the course of a song. I mean, plenty of people move between different sorts of rim shots for different sections of the tune or go from not catching the rim to catching the rim in the chorus. And having some of those be better than others really just kind of stifles the whole process. It's also worth mentioning that if you're going this high with the snare side head, it's hard to tell if it's in tune with itself. I mean, I use the ruler method here and stuff, but if you're just in a situation you're trying to make sure that the tensions are all the same because you want it to be resonating as a unit, if it's tuned so high that it's not resonating, then, what are you going to do? The wires are moving weird. There's wobbling going on in the decay of the drum. I used to think that was a wires issue too. It's not. So what's the fix? Well, the fix is, for me, and this varies from drum to drum, but it's about finding a middle ground for that drum and then experimenting from there. We have a middle ground in between these two, which is where I tend to put this drum pitch-wise for the snare side. That gives me a lot of options for batter, tensions, and different sorts of tunings, and it sounds good all over the head. It's important to remember that we need a lot of different things out of a snare drum, and certain situations can be narrower if you're just sort of like treating it like a sample and you're just hitting it in the center on 2 and 4 and things like that. But if you're playing in a situation where you want to have a lot of versatility in terms of dynamics, in terms of touch, in terms of strike zone and timbre and tonality and all of those things, and have them all be usable in context, we really have to know our snare drums. Honestly, is why I own less snare drums now in my life than I ever have. I have the least amount of them now because it's really been whittled down to ones that I understand. I feel like they understand me, and I feel like we have a sense of what we're trying to do together. And, this is one of those. Hopefully you have one that makes you happy too, and learning its personality, especially what its sort of happy medium is a really great thing to do so that you can deviate intelligently from that. Let's hear a little bit more of this tuning in context. So as you can see and hopefully hear, there's a lot more that I can do with this tuning that sounds good to me. It's a little more inspirational. It feels good physically to hit. The super low felt a little choked. The super high felt okay, but with the overtones all in there, it made me kind of hold back a little bit. And ultimately, again, as I said before and we say a lot, any tuning that makes you happy is fine. It's super okay. But in terms of learning about your drum and learning about where it wants to sit, these are the sorts of experiments that are really worthwhile. All right, now the big question, why is this important? This is important for a few reasons. First of which is that if you are relying on muffling, that's another variable you have to worry about to make sure that it's going exactly how you want, beyond tuning and playing and everything else. Number two is that in my experience and in a lot of people's experiences, the sound they actually like in the mix is one with some overtones. But if you spend a lot of time with your drums by yourself and then you listen to recordings, it's very difficult to tell how much there is going on in there because a lot of that high end goes into the guitars, some of the low end goes into the bass and other places. But if they're not there, you would notice it, and it would make it sit further back in the mix and not cut through so well, particularly with things like rim shots. Never mind the fact that as you add mass to the head, you're also inhibiting the dynamics, you're inhibiting the resonance, and you're overall just adding mass and lowering the pitch of every aspect of the behavior of the drum. I know for me that I love muffled sounds, and I also love unmuffled sounds. This is more about getting away from the idea that we have to do this in order to do our job. And the idea of a wide open sound and a good muffled sound should be a choice that we make artistically rather than out of necessity just to be able to do the gig. All right, I hope that was helpful. I had a lot of fun with that. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell down there so you hear about our new videos. We're doing a lot of videos right now, more videos per week than ever. Thanks so much to Skillshare for sponsoring this episode, sharing all of this with us and with you, and for helping us to keep doing what we're doing here. And lastly, I am very curious if you have tuning preferences for the snare side head that are specific to overtones, because this, in the grand scheme of my experience, is relatively new to me, the idea of defining the overtones and their behavior by the snare side head. It's not something that was shown to me. It was actually something that I fell upon when I got a really unfamiliar snare drum, the Keplinger, actually, if you've seen the old video about that, and discovering that its whole behavior was something that I'd never experienced before, and it turned out that I needed to spend time with the snare side head. So yeah, tell me your stories, and we'll see you out there.